The ABCs of horror.
Welcome to the HellBound Horror Show. What's the best zombie comedy? Well, in 2004, people went nuts over Shaun of the Dead. Then in 2009, Zombieland was also a huge hit. Nowadays, it feels like there's zombie comedies all over the place. You have your Zombievers, Zombies, Dead and Breakfast, Fido, and Redneck Zombies, and the list just goes on and on and on. However, I feel like people overlook tonight's film. Not only did it help create the zombie comedy genre, but it also helped advance the zombie genre in general and help change the cultural perception of zombies. And we find all this out and more in tonight's tale found in the Necronomicon. (1985's) Return of the Living Dead. Last year, I took a look at a film that helped produce one of the most popular subgenres of horror ever in 1968's Night of the Living Dead. I could argue that zombies are just as popular as vampires and werewolves. Night of the Living Dead was a big deal for inventing the modern day zombie, but its sequels helped cement it in our popular culture. But talking about Night of the Living Dead sequels can get confusing very fast, because Night of the Living Dead had two direct sequels. There was, of course, Dawn of the Dead from 1978, but there was also Return of the Living Dead from 1985. This gets a little confusing, so bear with me. You see, the original Night of the Living Dead was a collaboration between two very talented young men, John Russo, who came up with the story and then wrote it, and George Romero, who directed it. Keep in mind that Romero also had a hand in the writing process. With Night of the Living Dead being such a success, the two argued about what a sequel should look like. Eventually, this tore them apart, and they went their separate directions. However, they did come to a conclusion that each of them could make their own sequel to the film. Romero would be able to keep Of the Dead in his sequel titles, and Russo would be allowed to keep Of the Living Dead in his sequel titles. George Romero went on to produce classic after classic with his zombie movies, with Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. So what happened to John Russo and his sequel idea? Well, it seemed that it went through some production hell. Russo wrote a screenplay and was able to secure Tobe Hooper as the director. Tobe Hooper directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and was already considered a master of horror. But because it took so long for the project to get off its feet, Tobe Hooper eventually ended up leaving the film. This opened the door for Dan O'Bannon to come on board. Dan was already an established writer in Hollywood, having written John Carpenter's Dark Star and Ridley Scott's Alien. Dan came in and reworked the script and then directed the film. Even though it came out after Dawn of the Dead, and even a few months after Day of the Dead, Return of the Living Dead finally released. So, how was it? Well, it starts off with a title card that says that everything in the movie is true. It even says that the names and locations are also true. Bullcrap. Okay, there are tons of films that use the cliche, this is based off of true events. And this movie just takes it one step farther by saying that everything is a fact in this film. It just shows how goofy this movie is, and it's intentional. This is dark comedy done right. The movie wastes no time getting into things. Freddy is a fairly new employee of a medical supply warehouse. Frank shows Freddy around. We get to see the skeletons, the cadaver, and the split in half dog. After seeing all of this, Freddy asks Frank what's the strangest thing that he's ever seen come through. Things get serious here. Frank explains that the movie Night of the Living Dead was actually based on true events. There was a military chemical spill that brought the dead back to life. Things had to be changed in the movie so that the military wouldn't sue. Frank then explains that the military put the living dead bodies inside these industrial barrels, and for some reason, they were shipped to this very location. Freddy has a hard time believing and wants to see them for himself. So, Frank leads him down to the cellar where they keep the barrels. Freddy is in awe and wonders if the barrels leak.
Hey, these things don't leak, do they?
Leak? Hell no. These things were made by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Now that the toxic gas has escaped, everything in the warehouse starts coming alive. Eventually, Frank and Freddy come to, and they want to fix their wrongs. So, instead of calling the police, because that's too logical, they end up calling the owner of the business instead to hopefully come down and try to fix things. Meanwhile, Freddy's punk friends want to pick him up after work, but Freddy doesn't get off until 10. So, what are they gonna do until then? Hang out in a cemetery by his workplace? Yeah, great idea. That totally sounds like a place that normal people hang out at. Oh god! Freddy's friends are hilariously weird. We get two incredibly memorable characters here. We get the girl who is obsessed with death, almost to the point where it turns her on. She talks about the worst possible ways to die.
The worst way would be for a bunch of old men to get around me and start biting and eating me alive.
Oh yeah, that, my friends, that's called foreshadowing. And then all of a sudden, she strips naked and then dances in the cemetery. As one does, I guess. We also get the character named Suicide. He's whining about how no one understands him, and then he says the greatest line ever.
What do you think this is all about? You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
It's great stuff. Eventually, the owner, Bert, comes down to fix the mess. The cadaver is pounding around in the freezer. All three of them talk it out and come to the conclusion that in the movies, hitting the zombie in the brain will kill it. It's already technically dead, but it will put it down for good. So, like any good theory, they test it out. And, oops, this isn't your father's zombie film. These guys can't be knocked down. Even when severing the head, each part remains animated.
It worked in the movie! Well, it ain't working now, Frank.
In the movie line?
This changes the ball game completely. How do you get rid of it? What do you do? The owner comes up with the brilliant idea of using his friend's morgue across the street to take care of the body.
What the hell is in those bags?
Rabid weasels.
What?
They decide to cremate all of it, turn it all to ash. On paper, that is a great idea, but oops. All the smoke is going into the sky and then falling down as rain. Instead of an isolated problem, it is now widespread. Oh, and remember that cemetery nearby? Well, all the corpses are starting to rise. All hell starts to break loose. You'll also notice that Frank and Freddy aren't doing so well after breathing in the fumes from the beginning of the movie. After calling in the paramedics, it turns out that Frank and Freddy, well, they're not, how did I say this, alive anymore. They have no heartbeat, no blood pressure, and their body is at room temperature. Even rigor mortis has started to set in. Well, that's not good. Things get out of hand so quickly, and you realize how different this zombie movie is. Not only is it a horror comedy that perfectly plays with both genres, but it also creates so many new rules for zombies. This is the first movie where zombies can run. The first movie where zombies want brains. And the first movie where zombies talk? Yeah, not only do they say that they want brains, but they can also form sentences. They think. There's a part where after eating some cops, the zombies literally call over the police radio to send more cops.
Send more cops.
It's hilarious and terrifying. We even get to understand why zombies want to eat the brains of the living.
Why?
The pain.
You see, being dead sucks. It hurts. Zombies can literally feel themselves decomposing, and by eating brains, it numbs their pain. Dang! I believe that this is the scariest iteration of zombies that I have ever seen. Normally, if you're smart and a little bit lucky, you could survive a zombie movie. In theory, it's containable. However, in Return of the Living Dead, there seems to be nothing that you can really do. Sure, if the outbreak is small enough, you can keep them in an industrial barrel, but once things get out of hand, it seems like there's no going back. You can't stop them. It can spread through the rain, through smoke, and through your lungs. These zombies are faster, smarter, and can work together. It's a bleak outlook, and the movie captures this so well. Once things start going, no one is safe. It is for sure a different take than what Romero ended up doing for his sequel, both structurally and tonally. This movie does have its shortcomings, however. You can totally tell that they didn't have the budget that they needed to execute everything properly. Some of the props were a little rough, and some shots were reused throughout the film, and not to mention that some of the big action moments happen off screen. But no film is perfect, and the pros here definitely outweigh the cons. It's a great film, and if you enjoy 80s horror movies, you should really enjoy this film. I had only seen this once a few years ago, but I had always had fond memories of it. I ended up getting the Blu-ray of it, but I wasn't sure if I was going to keep it or not. After rewatching it, I am so glad that I didn't return it because I wouldn't be caught dead without it.